I want to tell you who I was before that ballroom, because the ballroom only makes sense if you understand the years that came before it. I grew up in Millhaven, a mid-sized city in the kind of region where people still talk about families the way they talk about weather systems, as forces that move through you, that you don't choose and can't entirely escape. My family was the Ostrowski family, which in our specific neighborhood carried a certain weight. Not wealth, not prestige, but the accumulated social currency of having been present and visible for 2 generations. My grandmother had owned a dry cleaning shop on Carmichael Street for 31 years. My mother had grown up behind that counter, which is where she had learned, I think, that the appearance of a thing mattered as much as the thing itself. Maybe more. My father left when I was 7 and Elena was 3. He didn't leave dramatically. No fight, no scene, no door slammed hard enough to remember. He simply reduced over the course of several months and then was gone, the way a season goes. My mother never talked about it directly. What she did was recalibrate the family's presentation. She dressed us well, she kept the house orderly, she made sure that whatever people thought about the Ostrowski family, they could not say we had fallen apart. Elena was the beneficiary of this project in a way that I, as the older one who remembered the before, could never quite be. Elena had my mother's instinct for presentation. She was warm in a way that read as effortless, pretty in a way that photographed well, and socially fluent in a way that made rooms easy for her. She had friends who adored her, a laugh that was genuinely infectious, and the specific gift of making people feel that their attention was the best part of her day. I was different. I was the one who read the fine print. I was the one who asked the follow-up question, who noticed the discrepancy in the account, who stayed up until 2 in the morning to make sure the thing was actually done rather than done enough. I was not difficult exactly. I was precise, which in a family that ran on presentation often amounted to the same thing. I had built a career out of it. I worked as a contract administrator for a mid-sized construction and development firm, which sounds unglamorous and in some ways is, but which had given me a particular set of skills that turned out to be extremely applicable to the business of organizing events. I understood vendor agreements. I understood payment schedules and cancellation clauses and the specific leverage that comes from being the named party on a binding document. I had spent 8 years learning to read contracts the way other people read novels, for character, for consequence, for what happens if things go sideways. I had also, over the years, built a quiet side practice of helping people organize large personal events, mostly weddings and anniversary parties for family friends, mostly through word of mouth, mostly because I was good at it and found the logistics genuinely satisfying. I didn't advertise it. It wasn't a business. It was the thing I did when someone I knew needed it, executed at the same standard I held everything else to, which was, if your name is on it, it has to be right. The person who had most shaped that standard was my great-aunt Margaret. Margaret was my grandmother's younger sister, which made her 77 years old and approximately the most self-possessed person I had ever met. She had worked for 40 years as a legal secretary in a mid-sized family law firm, and she had retired with a grasp of contractual process that most attorneys would have respected. She had never married. She had a small apartment full of books and very good kitchen equipment and an opinion about everything, delivered with the specific precision of someone who has spent 40 years watching what happens when people are imprecise. She had been the one, when I was 22 and had just started my career, who sat me down over dinner and told me the 3 things she considered non-negotiable in professional life. I remembered all 3. But the one that had stayed with me the most viscerally was the second one. Always be the signatory. The person whose name is on the agreement is the person who controls the outcome. Never let someone else hold that position for you, unless you trust them completely, and have verified it in writing. Margaret was not a warm person in the conventional sense. She didn't dispense comfort or softening. What she dispensed was clarity, which I had come to understand was a form of love. She was the first person I called later after everything had happened, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Elena got engaged in March of the year she turned 26. Her fiancé was a man named Callum Reyes, who was 32 and worked in commercial banking and who came from a family that, as my mother immediately and repeatedly established, was well regarded in the northern part of the city. The Reyes family, Callum's parents Domingo and Patricia and his 2 older sisters, were not ostentatious about their position, but they carried themselves with the easy confidence of people who had not had to worry about money in a long time, and who had grown accustomed to a certain level of quality in the events and occasions of their lives. My mother understood this instantly and oriented herself toward it with the full force of her considerable social intelligence. The Reyes family became the organizing principle of the wedding planning in a way that, to be fair, Elena herself seemed genuinely comfortable with. She loved Callum. She wanted his family to be part of the day. She wanted the wedding to reflect well on everyone, which is how I got involved. Elena called me in April, 6 weeks after the engagement, and asked if I would handle the vendor coordination. Not plan the wedding, the broad strokes were already being decided collectively by Elena and Callum and their mothers, but coordinate the vendors. Source the caterer, the florist, the photographer, the videographer, the lighting designer, the day of coordinator. Negotiate the contracts. Manage the relationships. Make sure the machinery of the event worked. I said yes. I had said yes to Elena my whole life in ways large and small. She was my sister and I loved her, and organizing things was something I was exceptionally good at, and the honest truth was that there was a part of me that wanted to be useful to her in a way she would remember. I want to be honest about that. I didn't go in without wanting something. What I wanted was to be seen. What I did not anticipate was how thoroughly I would be arranged out of that possibility before the day arrived. The vendor work began in April and ran through the summer. I sourced a catering company called Thornfield Hospitality, a regional firm with an excellent reputation for large-scale plated dinners, and negotiated a package that covered the full reception service. Past appetizers during cocktail hour, a 3-course plated dinner for 140 guests, a late-night snack station, and full staffing through the close of the event. The total contracted value was $18,000, with a $1,200 deposit paid at signing, and the balance due in 2 installments. The contract was in my name. My signature, my financial authorization, my professional contact details listed as the primary account holder. This was standard for how I worked. It was also, as it turned out, the detail that would determine everything. I sourced the florist, a woman named Petra who operated a boutique floral studio out of a converted greenhouse on the east side of the city, whose work I had seen at 2 events and which was consistently exceptional. Petra's contract covered ceremony arrangements, reception centerpieces, bridal party florals, and installation. $11,000 in my name. I sourced the photographer, a husband and wife team called Sable and North who had a waiting list 18 months long, and who I had managed to book by calling in a professional relationship I had built over 3 years. $9,000 in my name. The videographer, a 1-person studio called Lumen Work for $1,000 in my name. The lighting designer, a company I had used twice before, $3,500 in my name. The day of coordinator, an independent contractor named Jules who was meticulous and calm, and whose rate was $1,800 for the full day. Total, $43,300. 7 contracts, every one of them with my name at the signature line. I told Elena what I had arranged. I gave her a summary document, vendor names, services covered, contact information for style questions, and told her that any changes to scope or contract terms needed to go through me since I was the named party. She said that was fine, that made sense, that she trusted me completely. I told my mother the same thing in slightly less detail. She thanked me and asked whether Petra could do something with white peonies because Patricia Reyes had mentioned she was partial to them. I called Petra. Petra accommodated the peonies. I absorbed a $400 difference in seasonal flower pricing without mentioning it. Nobody asked to see the contracts. This would matter. The first indication that something was shifting came in June, at a wedding planning dinner at my mother's house. The dinner was meant to be a coordination meeting. Elena and Callum, both sets of parents, me. I had prepared a vendor status update and a timeline document and had brought printed copies in a folder, which in retrospect I understand was the wrong energy for what the evening actually was. Patricia Reyes arrived in a cream linen blazer, and immediately took charge of the dinner table's conversational atmosphere in the way of someone who has spent decades being the most organized person in every room. She was pleasant and warm and asked excellent questions, and she had, I noticed within the first 20 minutes, a very clear picture of how she thought the wedding should go, which was largely how the Reyes family did things, calibrated for the Reyes family's social context, with the Ostrowski family's primary role being to agree graciously and feel grateful for the alliance. This was not a hostile position. It was simply the natural gravity of 2 families with different amounts of social weight in the same orbit. My mother felt it immediately. I could see her calibrating in real time. laughing a little too readily at Patricia's observations, deferring on questions about the venue layout, agreeing that yes, of course, the welcome table near the entrance was a wonderful idea, that the cocktail hour on the terrace would be lovely. She was performing accommodation and she was doing it fluently, and part of me watched it with something close to sorrow. At some point during the main course, Patricia mentioned that she had heard wonderful things about a caterer called Harmon and Associates, which had done a colleague's daughter's wedding the previous fall. She said this pleasantly, not as a directive, but in the particular way that socially fluent people raise preferences, as an observation, leaving the door open. I said, equally pleasantly, that Thornfield Hospitality was already contracted for the catering, that I had worked with them on 2 previous events and found them exceptional, and that I was confident in the arrangement. Patricia nodded. Said that sounded lovely. Let the subject pass. My mother did not say anything at the table. But in the kitchen afterward, while we were putting away the serving dishes, she said, with her back to me and her voice careful, Patricia has some strong opinions about the wedding. I noticed, I said. She mentioned the caterer again to me, while you were talking to Callum. I set down the dish I was holding. Mom, the caterer's contracted. Switching at this stage would mean a cancellation fee, and a rebooking at a higher rate for the available dates. We're not switching the caterer. I know, she said. I want Patricia to feel like her preferences matter. Her preferences about flowers and table arrangements and the cocktail hour menu absolutely matter, I said. Her preferences about which catering company holds the contract are not something I can accommodate at this stage. My mother turned and looked at me with the expression I had seen all my life, the one that meant she agreed with me and resented agreeing with me simultaneously. Just be a little flexible, she said. I was as flexible as I could reasonably be for the next 3 months. When Patricia asked whether the centerpieces could be taller, I called Petra. When she asked whether the lighting could be warmer in the room's east end where the Reyes family tables were clustered, I called the lighting designer. When she asked whether the past appetizers during cocktail hour could include a specific item that Thornfield didn't have in their standard package, I called Thornfield and negotiated an addition at $120 per item for the full guest count, which I absorbed without discussing it with anyone. I was, in other words, doing what I always did, making the thing work invisibly for people who would not know or particularly care that it had required making. The shift in how the family treated me happened gradually and then, in the final weeks before the wedding, all at once. In late July, Elena called to tell me that she and Callum had decided to restructure the wedding party slightly. Her maid of honor, who had been her best friend since college, would now be handling some of the day of coordination that I had been planning to manage. Jules, the coordinator I had hired, would still be there, but my direct involvement in the day of logistics would be scaled back. Elena said this in the careful voice of someone who has been coached on how to say a thing. I asked why. Callum's mom. She mentioned that she thought having a family member so involved in the operational side might create a weird dynamic. Like it might look like we couldn't afford a proper coordinator. Elena paused. I know it's not how it is. But Jules is great and Sienna will be there, and I just think it might be easier. I said I understood. I did not say that I had hired Jules, that Jules worked for me in the context of this event, that the coordination dynamic Elena was describing as potentially awkward was one I had created and funded. In August, my mother informed me, in the same kitchen, in the same careful voice, that the seating chart had been finalized and that she wanted to walk me through it. She had a printout. She laid it on the counter. I found my name. Table 11. Near the back of the room adjacent to the bar. I looked at it for a long moment. That's the family table, I said, pointing to table 1, where my mother was seated, where Elena's aunts and close cousins were placed. I know, my mother said. But Patricia had specific requests about who was near the head table. She wanted it to feel like Callum's immediate family had a presence there. And with the cousins and the aunts it was getting crowded, and where is table 11 relative to the family tables? I asked. My mother looked at the printout. It's near the bar. Good location, actually. High traffic, very social. Mom, that's the overflow table. It's not. It's a perfectly lovely table. And honestly, Nadia, you'll be running around with the vendors most of the day anyway, so the vendors are contracted and coordinated, I said. Jules is the day of contact. I was expecting to sit with the family. I know, she said. She folded the seating chart slightly, a small nervous gesture. It's just one evening. Patricia. She's going to be Elena's family for the rest of her life. This is about starting that relationship on the right foot. I looked at my mother. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the seating chart. Okay, I said. She looked up, surprised by the brevity of it. Okay, I said again. Who's at table 11? She told me. Callum's college roommates, 2 cousins from out of town, Elena's old neighbor. Pleasant people. Nobody from our immediate family. I took a photograph of the seating chart with my phone when my mother went to answer a knock at the door. Not for any specific purpose. Just because I wanted to have it. 2 weeks before the wedding, the thing that crystallized everything happened at the final vendor coordination call. I ran the call. Thornfield's event manager, Petra, Sable and North Lumen Work, the lighting company, Jules. Standard pre-event alignment. Timelines, delivery windows, access logistics, day of contact protocols. At the end of the call, Thornfield's event manager, a methodical woman named Rosario, asked me to confirm the authorization procedure for day of service decisions. Specifically, if there was a scope question or a service modification during the reception, who was the decision maker? I told her me. I was the named party on the contract. Any scope decision went through me. Rosario confirmed it, made a note, said she would have her on-site coordinator reach out to me at the 6 o'clock service check regardless. I noted this. A 6 o'clock call from Thornfield's on-site coordinator, at the reception. I did not mention this to my mother or to Elena. The week of the wedding arrived. I delivered the final vendor packets, confirmed the installation schedule, answered 17 separate text messages from Petra about peony availability and stem counts, and spent 45 minutes on the phone with the lighting designer about a dimmer issue at the venue that turned out to be resolvable. I ironed my dress, a deep navy wrap dress that I had bought in July, on the Wednesday before the Saturday wedding. On Saturday morning I was at the venue at 9:30 to oversee the morning setup. I confirmed Petra's delivery at 10, walked the lighting designer through his afternoon calibration schedule, checked the Thornfield kitchen setup with Rosario personally. By noon everything was on track. Elena arrived at 1. She was luminous, that is the only accurate word for her in that moment. Whatever complicated thing lived between us, there was nothing complicated about watching my sister walk into the room where she was about to get married and seeing her face. I helped her with a piece of her veil that had caught. I told her she looked beautiful. She hugged me and said she was so glad I was there. I believed her. I think I still do. The ceremony was at 4. It was held in the venue's garden pavilion, a long rectangular space framed by white columns and climbing roses that Petra had supplemented with an installation of ivory blooms along the aisle that was, I noted objectively, one of the most beautiful things I had seen produced for an event I had organized. I sat in the 4th row and watched my sister marry Callum Reyes and felt, for those 40 minutes, something I didn't want to complicate. Then the reception doors opened, and I found my seat at table 11. Table 11 was, in the precise geography of the Thornfield ballroom, positioned along the east wall, between the bar service station and a partial divider of potted boxwoods that the lighting designer had dressed with small warm lights. It was objectively a pleasant location. The lighting in that corner was warm and flattering. The bar was 3 steps away. What it was not was the family table. I settled my wrap and set my clutch on the back of my chair and took in the full room. The head table was on the raised platform at the far end, Elena and Callum at center, then Patricia and Domingo Reyes immediately to their right, then my mother and her husband Bernard to their left, then a procession of Reyes family members extending down the table in a sequence that communicated, if you understood how seating charts worked, exactly where the evening's social gravity was located. The chair at the family table, table 2 where Elena's aunts were seated, that had my cousin Dorita's name on it now, and Dorita was already seated and talking with my Aunt Irene, and the arrangement looked complete and settled, as though there had never been another possibility. I sat down. My table companions were arriving, Callum's college roommate, a relaxed man named Fletcher who immediately offered to get me a drink, 2 cousins from out of town who were enthusiastically overwhelmed by the venue, and Elena's old neighbor, a woman in her 60s named Harriet who shook my hand warmly and said she'd known Elena since she was 5. I told Harriet I was Elena's sister. Her face shifted. A small recalibration, a flicker of something. "Oh," she said. "I would have thought you'd be." She stopped. "You look lovely, dear." I thanked her and accepted the drink Fletcher had brought back from the bar. The room was filling now. The string quartet near the entrance was playing something I recognized distantly, a Debussy arrangement, and the waitstaff were moving through with the first round of champagne, and the conversations were building into the particular warm noise of a reception hitting its rhythm. From where I sat, I could see my mother at the head table. She was talking with Patricia, who had one hand on her husband's arm and was leaning forward slightly, saying something that made my mother laugh. A laugh I recognized, the social one, the one that means I need this to go well. I had a sip of the drink Fletcher had brought me. Vodka soda, which I had not asked for but which was fine. My phone showed 5:47. Rosario would call at 6. At 5:53, I saw my mother look across the room in my direction. Not at me specifically, she was scanning the way she does when she is managing something and needs to locate all the pieces. Her eyes passed over table 11 and moved on. At 5:58, the head table's energy shifted. What I mean is, I was watching as I had been watching all evening, and I saw the moment when my mother's posture changed. She had been leaning forward, engaged, and then something made her straighten slightly and look toward the ballroom entrance. A woman in a Thornfield staff jacket, dark blazer, small pin, the composed bearing of a hospitality professional, had entered the room and was moving toward the head table with the quiet, purposeful movement of someone who needs to speak to a specific person and knows that person is somewhere in that direction. It was not Rosario. It was Rosario's on-site coordinator, a young woman I had met briefly during the morning setup whose name tag read Celia. Celia reached the head table and leaned toward my mother, who was the nearest adult, and spoke quietly. I could not hear the words from across the room, but I watched my mother's face. Something moved through it that I can only describe as the expression of a person who has just been asked a question they were not prepared to be asked. Her chin came forward, her eyes shifted. She shook her head once in a small careful motion, and then she said something. Celia listened, then spoke again. My mother's hand moved to the table. Celia straightened. She looked around the room. She was looking for someone. My phone rang at exactly 6 o'clock. I looked at the screen, Thornfield Hospitality. I let it ring once more, then answered. "Ms. Ostrowski?" Rosario's voice, calm and professional. "Speaking," I said. "Hi, I'm just following up on our protocol. Celia is on the floor and needs your authorization for the hot service start. We also have a minor modification request from the host table regarding the appetizer course. One of the guests has flagged a preference. Celia can walk you through it, but she needs confirmation from the contract holder before she can proceed." "Of course," I said. "Tell Celia I'm at table 11, east wall by the bar." A pause. "Will do. She'll be right over." I ended the call. I set my phone on the table. Fletcher glanced at it, then at me, with the mild curiosity of someone who has registered that something is happening but hasn't parsed what. Across the room, Celia had received a message on her earpiece. She turned and began moving through the room, threading between tables, heading east. She was heading toward me, and my mother, who had watched Celia turn and walk away from the head table, followed Celia's path with her eyes, across the room, through the tables, past the bar station, until she arrived at table 11. Until she arrived at me. My mother's face in that moment is something I have thought about many times since. The expression was not anger. It was not quite surprise. It was the specific look of a person watching a narrative they constructed carefully over months encounter something they had not accounted for. Celia reached table 11. She was professional and pleasant and entirely unaware of the architecture of the moment she was stepping into. "Ms. Ostrowski? I'm Celia, Thornfield on site. I spoke with Rosario. We're ready to begin the hot service. I just need your verbal authorization and a quick signature on the modified run-of-show sheet. We also have the appetizer note, if you have 30 seconds. "Of course," I said. I stood up. Harriet, beside me, was watching with the frank attention of someone who has just understood that the woman she was told to seat next to the bar table was not who she had been made to think she was. Fletcher had his drink halfway to his mouth and had stopped. Celia had a clipboard. She set it on the table and walked me through the modified run of show, the hot service window, A minor adjustment to the appetizer sequence because one of the Reyes family guests had a shellfish allergy that had been communicated late, and the timing of the late-night station setup. She was thorough and efficient, and I confirmed each item, and at the end she held out the sheet and I signed the contract holder line. Nadia Ostrowski, primary authorization. Thank you so much, Celia said. She glanced at the sign sheet, then back at me. Are you enjoying the evening? It's a beautiful reception. It really is, I said. Thornfield has been excellent. Please tell Rosario. Celia smiled, tucked the clipboard under her arm, and walked back toward the kitchen service corridor. The room had not gone silent. The quartet was between pieces, and the ambient conversation of 140 guests was doing what ambient conversation does, filling the space, self-sustaining, requiring no intervention. Most of the room had noticed nothing. The head table had noticed everything. Patricia Reyes was watching the path Celia had traced from the head table to table 11 and back again with the expression of a woman assembling information. She had seen Celia approach my mother and be redirected. She had seen Celia cross the room to table 11. She had seen me stand up, review a clipboard and sign a document. She was precise and socially intelligent, and she understood without being told that something about the architecture of this evening was different from what she had been given to understand. She leaned toward my mother and said something. My mother answered. I could see the shape of it, brief, insufficient, the answer of someone buying time. Patricia said something else. Longer this time. Her husband Domingo heard it and turned slightly to listen. My mother's hand was at the tablecloth, her fingers touching the edge. A small contained gesture that I had seen 100 times in my life. It was what she did when she was holding herself together. It was Domingo who acted first. He was a quiet man, Domingo Reyes, measured, courteous, with the unhurried manner of someone who has spent a long time in an industry where reading rooms and people quickly is a professional asset. He stood from the head table, said something brief to Patricia, and walked across the ballroom floor with the calm directness of a person who has decided to go find something out firsthand. He reached table 11 as I was sitting back down. Ms. Ostrowski, he said. His voice was warm and even. Nadia. I'm Domingo, Callum's father. I know, I said. We met at the rehearsal dinner. We did. He smiled, genuine without performance. I wanted to come introduce myself properly. I've been watching the evening run beautifully, and I realized I didn't know who to thank for it. He glanced at the kitchen corridor where Celia had disappeared. From what I just saw, I think I know now. The Thornfield team is exceptional, I said. Rosario Vega runs a very tight operation. I'm sure she does, Domingo said. But someone organized the vendors. Someone signed the contracts. He was not being pointed. He was being precise. Patricia asked your mother who the catering contact was. Your mother said she'd been managing the vendors. He said it without judgment, simply as information. That didn't quite match what I just watched. I held his gaze. My mother has been very involved in the wedding. Domingo nodded slowly, the nod of a man deciding how much to say. How many vendors did you contract? He asked. 7, I said. And the total value? I told him. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked across the room at the head table, at my mother, who was watching this conversation with her hand still at the cloth, and something moved through his expression that was not quite the freeze beat I had expected, but was something more contained and in some ways more significant. The recalibration of a man who has just understood that his family has been, however indirectly, misled about who built the evening they were standing inside. You're Elena's sister, he said. Yes. He looked at table 11. At Harriet. At Fletcher. At the position of the table relative to the head table, relative to the family tables, relative to the seating geography of an event I had organized and funded. I see, he said. Quietly. Not to me. To himself almost. He straightened. He extended his hand. I shook it. Thank you for the evening, he said. It's genuinely beautiful. All of it. He turned and walked back to the head table. I watched him return. I watched him sit down and lean toward Patricia. I watched Patricia's expression as she listened. I watched her turn and look at me, a full, direct, appraising look, the kind that assembles a conclusion. And I watched what happened to my mother's face as Patricia turned back and said something to her, quietly, directly, the particular address of one woman to another that does not leave room for deflection. My mother's shoulders dropped a fraction. Her hand came away from the tablecloth. She was nodding, the small compelled nod of someone receiving something they cannot redirect. That was the freeze beat. Not a gasp, not a scene, just the specific collapse of a particular story in real time in front of the people it had been told to. Fletcher, beside me, exhaled slowly. So you organized all of this? I helped with the vendor side, I said. He looked around the room, at the flowers, at the lighting, at the seamless table settings, at Celia's staff moving through the room with the choreographed precision of a well-run service. That's a significant understatement, he said. Harriet touched my arm briefly. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The cascade began during the dessert course and moved in the way that social information moves when it is accurate and significant. Quickly, without needing to be announced. Patricia, I learned later from my cousin Dorota, asked my mother directly, during the dessert service while Callum was doing his round of table greetings, who had actually negotiated the vendor contracts. My mother's answer this time was honest. She said I had handled the vendor coordination. All of it. Patricia asked about the financial side. My mother, to her credit, told the truth about that too. Dorota said Patricia had listened without her expression changing, which Dorota described as more alarming than if she had reacted. What Patricia did was adjust. She was a woman of social precision, and she adjusted with precision. The warmth she had directed at my mother throughout the cocktail hour and the dinner service became correct. Polite. The specific calibrated politeness that is a withdrawal of warmth rather than its absence. My mother felt it. I could see her feeling it, the slight overreach in her laugh, the careful animation of someone trying to hold a temperature in a room that has changed. Callum came to table 11 during his rounds. He greeted Harriet and Fletcher and the cousins, and then he came to me and instead of the brief warm acknowledgement I had expected, he crouched down slightly to be at eye level with where I was seated and said quietly, Nadia. My dad told me. He stopped, looked at his hands for a moment. I didn't know. About the contracts, about all of it. I didn't know. It's okay, I said. It's not really, he said. He met my eyes. I'm sorry you're at this table. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, she's happy. You both are. That's what the day needed to be. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. My parents would like you to join us at the head table for the cake cutting if you're willing. My mom asked me to ask. I considered this for a moment. Tell Patricia thank you, I said. I'll come over for the toast. He nodded again and moved on. I came over for the toast. I stood at the edge of the raised platform while Bernard gave the father of the bride's speech, which was warm and brief and made Elena cry in the good way. And while Callum's best man told a story that made the room laugh, and while Elena herself spoke, briefly and beautifully, about what the day meant to her. She looked at me once during her toast. A specific look, not an apology, not an acknowledgement exactly, but something that carried the weight of one. I held it for a moment and then let it go. The music started after the toasts. The first dance happened and it was what it should have been. Two people in a room full of people who loved them, briefly alone together. Sable and North captured it with the quiet mastery I had paid $9,000 for, and Lumenworks' camera held steady from the opposite corner, and the lighting had been calibrated precisely for this moment, the warm wash I had specified in the brief 3 months ago, and all of it was working exactly as I had built it to work. My mother found me at 9:30, near the garden exit doors. She waited while I finished a conversation with Petra, who had come by to check on the arrangements and to say good night. When Petra moved away, my mother stepped forward. She did not begin with an apology. My mother rarely does. Apologies cost her something, and she is careful with her expenditures. What she said was, Patricia thinks very highly of you. That's kind of her, I said. She asked Domingo to ask if you'd be open to doing coordination work for their niece's wedding in the spring. Apparently they've been struggling to find someone reliable. I looked at my mother. She wants to talk to you about it, my mother continued. Domingo gave me her contact information to pass to you. She held out a card. Patricia Reyes's personal card. Handwritten number on the back. I took it. Nadia, my mother said. Her voice had shifted. The careful one was gone, and what was underneath it was smaller and less managed. I didn't tell them you were. I didn't say you weren't involved. I let them think that I had organized more of it then. Mom, I said. She stopped. I know what you did, I said. Not harshly. Just precisely. I don't need you to explain it. She nodded once and her chin dipped slightly. Not quite a bow. Just a concession. The flowers are beautiful, she said finally. Petra is extraordinary. She is, I said. I'll tell her you said so. I said goodnight to Harriet, who pressed my hand with both of hers. I said goodnight to Fletcher, who said he hoped to run into me at the next family event under better table arrangements, which made me laugh. A real one, unexpected. I confirmed the strike timeline with Jules and did a final check-in with Celia from Thornfield. Then I walked out of the ballroom through the garden doors, into the cool evening air of the estate grounds, and I stood for a moment in the dark with the sound of the reception music coming through the walls behind me, muffled and warm, the specific sound of an event that is working, and I breathed. I called Margaret from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been waiting. Well, she said. It went fine, I said. A pause. Fine. Patricia Reyes wants to hire me. Margaret made a sound that was almost a laugh. Of course she does. I got into my car. The drive home was 40 minutes, highway most of the way. The city lights on the horizon coming into view around the 20-minute mark. I had a podcast queued up that I had been meaning to listen to for 2 weeks. An interview with a contract law specialist about arbitration clauses in service agreements, and I listened to it the rest of the way home. I made tea when I got in. Not coffee, it was late and I needed to sleep. I made tea in the blue ceramic pot that Margaret had given me when I passed my contract administration certification 6 years ago. The one with the small repair line across the lid where I had glued it back together after dropping it, and that I had kept because the repair was clean and the pot still worked perfectly. I sat at my kitchen table with the tea and the quiet and thought, for a little while, about nothing at all. Patricia called the following Thursday. We spoke for 40 minutes. The niece's wedding was in April, 120 guests, a venue in the northern part of the city that Patricia's family had used before. She had a budget figure in mind that was higher than I would have quoted. I told her I'd send a scope of work proposal the following week. Elena called on Sunday. She said, I didn't know about the contracts. Not really. I knew you were handling the vendors, but I didn't understand. I didn't think about whose name was on them. I told her I believed her because I did, mostly. She asked if we could have lunch. I said yes. My mother called on Monday. She said, Patricia mentioned that she'd reached out to you. I said yes. She said, that's good. I said it was. There was a pause and then she said, you've always been very good at the work that actually matters. You always have been. It was, from my mother, a significant thing to say. I received it without making it larger than it was, and without making it smaller. I told her the peonies had been beautiful. She said she knew. We made a plan for dinner the following weekend. I called Margaret after I hung up and told her what my mother had said. Took her long enough, Margaret said. It did, I agreed. Well, she said, in the tone she uses when a thing has resolved to her satisfaction. At least she got there. Here is what I have thought about since that evening, in the weeks when things have settled enough to look at without flinching. There is a particular kind of work that families assign to the people they trust most and value least publicly. The work that requires competence rather than visibility. The work that holds the thing together so that the visible people can stand in front of it and be seen. For a long time I accepted that assignment without naming it. I thought that doing the work was enough. That being the one whose name was on the contract was enough, even if no one else knew whose name was there. What I learned is that it is enough, but only if you know it. The contract does not care whether anyone acknowledges it. The contract is simply true. And eventually, if you are patient, the contract speaks for itself. That's my story. A clipboard in a ballroom, a pot of tea at a kitchen table, and a business card pressed into my hand by a woman who had originally sat me by the bar. My question for you. If you had done everything I did, organized, funded, managed every vendor, and your family still moved you to the overflow table, would you have spoken up? Or would you have let the 6 o'clock call do the talking? Drop your answer in the comments.